Good morning. This is Breakfast with Brian, and I'm Marcella, and this is
Theo!
And today we listened to Brian Johnson's Philosopher's Note about the courage to create by Rollo May. And the book's main focus was about overcoming our fear to put ourselves out there in the world. And a little bit later on in this conversation, we'll talk about that concept and how it's not only about overcoming our fear, but also using it wisely. The big idea that really resonated with us today is finding the center of our strength, and how we want to talk about how Theo and I did that in the process of creating Breakfast with Brian. So,
And
yes,
we want to share with you who are listening in order that you may be inspired to put something out there in the world that you want to create. So how the whole idea came up was, I was thinking, Marcela, you're very good at powerful questions that really penetrate deeply into what you want to know from somebody. And I was thinking, oh wow, if you use that skill and we had a dialogue, and then the next thought was we could do an audio like Brian does, but it would be between us. And we listen to a philosopher's note every morning as part of our ritual. And if we just have this idea of breakfast with Brian, and we could talk about what happened that particular morning, what we listened to, and how it inspired us. So my recollection is at that point we were like, yeah, let's do it. And so then we were excited. And then as we got into the process, there were some fears that came up. And maybe you could share. I know for me, one of the things was the whole technology. And like when you pulled out GarageBand, and we can just like very fine tune exactly where to stop if we do something, we need to record it over, and it's seamless. And so, your ability with that was great.
I can relate to some fears that I had, were basically that no one was going to listen, that once we started getting into the nitty-gritty about actually asking permission to do this from Brian, or using my own photos or public jingles, things that I actually had to incorporate others in, was really difficult for me, because I just wanted to do it my way. And it actually really, really helped when we went through the process of Theo telling me about the integrity behind like doing all of these things, and how if people ended up really listening, that it would save us a lot of trouble in the long run. So the first process was emailing Brian, and I thought he was kind of this untouchable figure, celebrity that was never going to email us back, and I just didn't really see the point in that. But actually Brian did respond, and so that right there was an example that built my integrity, or really like showed me that it's worth it.
You got through your fear.
Right.
I think that there's two things you're addressing here. One was the fear of how if people would listen, and if Brian would say, yeah, this is good, and which he did. We were so pumped. You should have heard the screams. We were screaming this one when we got his email.
Yeah. We'll make sure to show you at the bottom of this the response that he sent us.
We'll reproduce his email it's got it screaming. And so that was the fear part about people listening in Brian's response. And then there was part about, it's a little bit more of a hassle if we have to use something in the public domain versus just use any old music that you happen to have. And we had a whole conversation about that. And
so I think
if you divide those two, it would be helpful for people.
Oh, well, I think so. Basically, I'm just going to summarize, like, there was an overwhelm of fear, doubt, and kind of this lack of integrity that I had surrounding this. But what we really wanted to do is work on shifting those negative aspects into something positive that we could work with and, like, push us forward.
So we mentioned earlier that fear can not only hold us back, but it can be a source of information to act wisely. Like, for example, in the example that Brian gave, it was like it's wise to put a parachute on before you jump out of an airplane. So the fear to jump out of an airplane without a parachute is good information. And similarly, in our process, what we did was we looked at those barriers that were like standing in front of us and like, well, let's compose this email to Brian. So we spent some time and said what our intention was, and then said, here, you can listen to it.
But I
And
guess
so,
what I'm really wondering is
Yeah.
like, how can they use fear in their lives, just like kind of a
Good.
more broad?
Yeah, here's the basic principle that I use is when fear comes up, don't let it stop you, but let it guide you to be cautious. And I think that when you just kind of slow down and take it each step at a time, one of the metaphors in the I Ching is like an old fox walking on thin ice will go slowly and test each thing till he hears a crack, whereas a young fox will impulsively run across and fall in the water.
And so, so I guess do it in spite of our fear. That was something that Brian talked a little bit about, but I mean, keep it in the back of our heads, but still commit to the doing.
Yeah, keep moving
And that's what
forward,
got us
but
there.
cautiously. If fears comes up, that's information to put the parachute on.
So to reiterate, that the big idea is finding the center of our strength. And so, if Theo, if you want to talk a little bit about.
Well, what we found was the synergy, the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts between us. Marcella's ability to ask those poignant questions and her ability to deal with the technology of the computer
Kind of brought out your wisdom and made it put it in a space that can be shared, like on a broad scale.
Right. And so the two of us, and then also I think there was like this energizing factor, like this is fun doing it together, much more fun. Like
that we wouldn't have done it.
We wouldn't have
alone.
done it. Yeah, my wife kept reflecting to us. She said, "This is a scary kind of thing, putting yourself out in the public like this. That you probably each one of you individually wouldn't have done this, but doing it together." So that's another place where I think the synergy of working together helped.
Great. So in exploring that big idea on a broader scale, I want to read a quote from our reading today that says, "The most fundamental choice we will ever make is the decision to create our greatest life." And I'm just wondering, I'm interested to know what that brings up for you, looking globally.
That's very powerful for me because, quick story, I visited a friend of mine who I'd gone to high school with 20 years later. He was a professor of philosophy, and he said, "Theo," he said, "in my study of philosophy, the greatest thing I've learned is if you can think of it, you can create it." And that just struck the core of me as true somehow. And for the next 10 years or so, I thought, well, what's the best idea I can think of? Because if I can think of it, we can create it. And what I finally came up with was the idea of total, permanent world peace and prosperity.
That's awesome.
And that idea has really to participate in contributing to that in the world has been the thing that my knowingness is that's the greatest thing I can put my attention on.
Right. And so you had a thought, like a specific idea that came up last night. Did you want to share what that
Which
idea
one was that?
It was about the Barack Obama
Oh yeah.
synergizing.
Right. Well, to me, what needs to happen for that idea to become reality is for it to become part of the human belief that we can do it. That's the first step. And in terms of the current scene, it's now September 2010, and we're going into the midterm elections, and those of us with progressive values, if you will, have been there's a there were great expectations about what Barack Obama would be able to do, and I feel there's some disappointment. Like for myself, I have such a strong value for peace and his carrying on the war. I feel like if he were to use his charisma and finesse and cleverness and his strengths
really
to approach it, like I heard one guy say, what if you went into the warlords in Afghanistan and you give them $50 bill and you say, I'll be back in another 6 months if there's no war in your territory, rather than going out and trying to stop war by having war. And here's what came up for me. It seems to me that it is a mistake for each of us who value peace and prosperity and the security that creates in the world and in our families, that we not give up and give in to the forces of fear, frustration, and in some cases, anger and cynicism within ourselves and each other, but to realize the strength we have in working together and use the power of synergy to keep moving forward.
I kind of just wanted to really focus on that last part about the teamwork part and the.
Well, that's where I was going to go.
Right.
That we need to redouble our efforts and work together towards those good ends, rather than.
So I mean,
give up.
there's more strength in peace than there is strength in war, and I think we just need to live out examples of that for others to see.
Right.
And then once we really can harness the strength within ourselves, then that is our opportunity to share it and show others how to find the strengths within themselves. And so I think that's it.
And that fits right into the title of your blog, Bare Feet, Not Arms.
Peace, not war.
Yeah. Okay.
So we really hope this inspires you to create what you want to see in the world and to be your best self. Cool. Well, I'm happy that we got to share this with you today, and hope to see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.